The bride stood in front of the mirror as soft morning light spilled into the room, her heart full and racing at the same time. She had imagined this day so many times that it almost felt unreal that it had finally arrived. Every detail of the wedding had been planned with love, patience, and quiet sacrifice. The delicate white dress, chosen months ago with trembling excitement, hugged her like a promise of forever. She smiled at her reflection, seeing not just herself, but the future she believed she was stepping into, one filled with partnership, trust, and shared dreams. Outside, the venue buzzed with life. Elegant floral arrangements lined the aisle, their scent floating through the air, blending with soft music and laughter. Family members hurried around, fixing decorations, adjusting chairs, and greeting guests with proud smiles. Her parents' eyes shone with emotion, and relatives whispered blessings, reminding her how lucky she was. The weight of expectation pressed gently on her shoulders, not in a painful way, but as a reminder that this day mattered to everyone, not just her. Her thoughts drifted to the groom, the man she loved deeply and trusted completely. She believed in him with a certainty that had guided her through doubts and difficult moments. He had promised her a future where she would never feel alone, and she had built her life around that promise. In her mind, the wedding was not just a ceremony, but the beginning of a safe and beautiful chapter where love would always be enough. Yet, beneath the joy, there were tiny, almost invisible cracks she refused to examine. A distracted tone in his voice during recent calls, moments when his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes, unexplained absences brushed off with casual excuses. Each time her intuition whispered, she silenced it with faith. Today was too important for doubts, she told herself. Love required trust, and trust meant choosing belief over fear. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to walk toward what she believed was her perfect future. He was the kind of man people admired without question. In public, he carried himself with effortless charm, always dressed sharply, always knowing the right words to say. Friends described him as confident and ambitious, someone destined for success. Family members praised his manners and his ability to command respect in any room. Around him, people felt secure, convinced he was dependable and strong, a man any woman would be lucky to marry. Behind that polished image, he kept a circle of friends who laughed too loudly at his jokes and never challenged his behavior. They brushed off his arrogance as confidence and his carelessness as harmless fun. When he crossed lines, they covered for him, turning uncomfortable truths into private secrets. Even some family members chose silence over confrontation, preferring peace and appearances to honesty. There had been signs, small enough to ignore but sharp enough to wound in hindsight. He sometimes dismissed her opinions, with a smile that felt rehearsed. He guarded his phone too carefully, stepping away to answer calls. Promises were occasionally delayed, then forgotten, explained away with excuses that sounded reasonable at the time. Each moment planted doubt, but love urged her to look away. She told herself no relationship was perfect. She believed his confidence meant stability, his distance meant stress, his silence meant exhaustion. Yet beneath the surface of wedding preparations and public smiles, a quiet tension simmered, unnoticed by everyone except the faint voice in her heart that she refused to hear. It lingered in brief pauses, in glances held a second too long, in the way certainty felt slightly forced. Still, she wrapped those feelings in hope and trust, convincing herself that love required faith. On this day, she chose belief, unaware of what waited ahead behind the wedding smiles silently. As the final touches were being made and guests settled into their seats, she felt a sudden tightness in her chest. The noise, the smiles, the constant questions, it all became too much. She told herself she just needed a moment to breathe, to calm the fluttering nerves that came with such a life-changing step. Slipping away quietly, she moved down a side corridor, away from the main hall and the watchful eyes of family and friends. The hallway was quieter, dimmer, lined with closed doors and soft shadows. Her heels echoed lightly against the floor as she walked, one hand resting against the wall to steady herself. She didn't intend to go far, just enough to clear her mind. At the far end, a small balcony door stood slightly open, letting in a breeze that carried the faint sounds of the city outside. She slowed her steps, feeling oddly comforted by the isolation. That was when she heard it. Laughter. Low voices. Familiar. She paused, her breath catching as one voice cut through the others, clear and unmistakable. It was his voice. The groom's. At first, she smiled instinctively, assuming he was calming his own nerves, perhaps sharing a joke with friends. But something in his tone made her stomach tighten. It was relaxed, careless. Too relaxed for a man about to promise his life to someone. She took a few hesitant steps closer, drawn by a mix of curiosity and unease. The words became clearer, and with every second, her heart sank further. This wasn't the voice of a nervous groom. This was the voice of someone unguarded, speaking freely behind closed doors. A cold sensation spread through her chest as curiosity slowly transformed into dread. Her fingers curled into her palm as she stood frozen in place, listening. In that quiet hallway, surrounded by shadows and half-heard words, she felt the first real crack form in the dream she had so carefully built, unaware that the next moments would change everything she believed. She stood just outside the partially closed door, her body rigid, every breath shallow as the groom's voice continued. At first, her mind refused to process the words, as if they belonged to some other story, some other couple. Then the meaning struck her with brutal clarity. He laughed softly as he spoke, confessing without shame that he had been seeing someone else for months. He called it harmless, temporary, something she would never need to know about. Another voice teased him, and he responded casually, admitting that the marriage itself was a smart move. Good for his image, good for his career, good for the connections her family brought. Love, he said, was optional. Her knees weakened as he went on, mocking the way she trusted him so completely, the way she believed every promise. He spoke of her devotion as if it were something foolish, something naive. Then came the words that shattered her entirely. He had never loved her, not the way she loved him. He said it plainly, without hesitation, as if stating a fact that required no emotion. To him, this wedding was a performance, a transaction, a step toward the life he wanted. The world seemed to tilt. A sharp pain spread through her chest, so intense it felt physical, like something tearing inside her. Her ears rang, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse onto the cold floor. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth, desperate to hold back a sound, a sob, a scream, anything that might give her away. Tears burned her eyes, but none fell. She was too stunned to cry. Memories flooded her mind in cruel flashes, late-night conversations, shared laughter, whispered dreams about the future. Every moment she had cherished twisted into something unrecognizable. The man she thought she knew dissolved into a stranger in seconds. Trust turned to ash. Love became humiliation. She stepped back silently, her movements slow and careful, as if even the air might betray her. No one noticed as her world collapsed. The music outside still played, guests still smiled, flowers still bloomed. But inside her, everything went quiet. Something precious had died in that hallway, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. She moved away from the hallway as if walking through water, each step heavy, unsteady, until she found a quiet room where no one would look for her. The door closed softly behind her, and only then did her strength finally give out. She sank onto a chair, her body folding inward, shoulders shaking as silent sobs tore through her. She pressed her face into her hands, biting her lip to keep from crying out. This was not how heartbreak was supposed to sound. There was no dramatic collapse, only a suffocating ache and a hollow pressure in her chest. Her mind betrayed her with memories she hadn't invited. The first time he held her hand and promised forever. The nights she stayed awake planning a life around him. The sacrifices she made without question, compromises, apologies she didn't owe. Parts of herself she slowly gave away. Every promise replayed now with cruel clarity. Stripped of meaning, she realized how deeply she had believed in him, how completely she had trusted his words. For a moment, panic took over. She imagined running, slipping out of the venue, disappearing before anyone could stop her, leaving the dress, the guests, the entire lie behind. Another thought followed just as fiercely, exposing him, marching back into the hall, tearing the truth into the open, watching his confident mask shatter in front of everyone. Her heart raced at both possibilities, fear and anger colliding inside her. Then, in the middle of the storm, something shifted. The tears slowed. Her breathing steadied. She lifted her head, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. She saw the pain, yes, but she also saw strength she hadn't recognized before. A quiet resolve settled in her chest. She understood then that reacting in desperation would give him control. Whatever she did next would be on her terms. The girl who had walked into this wedding full of blind faith was gone. In her place stood someone awakening to her own power, and that realization changed everything. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed shape. What had been sharp and overwhelming settled into something colder, clearer. She stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress, as if she were smoothing her thoughts. Every breath she took felt deliberate now. The chaos inside her had organized itself into focus. She understood something powerful in that moment. She no longer owed him honesty, mercy, or emotional transparency. Canceling the wedding would be easy. Exploding in anger would be satisfying for a few seconds. But she didn't want easy, and she didn't want temporary relief. She wanted control. She wanted truth exposed in a way that could never be twisted or denied. A quiet, dangerous plan began forming in her mind, piece by piece, like a puzzle finally revealing its image. She thought about the guests gathered for love, the families who believed in this union, the groom standing confidently at the center of it all. Public image mattered to him. Respect mattered. Applause mattered. That would be the stage. Whatever was going to happen needed witnesses. It needed light. Running away would let him rewrite the story. Staying meant she would own it. She looked at herself again, noticing how steady her eyes were now. No red-rimmed panic. No trembling hands. Just calm. That calm frightened even her, because it felt unfamiliar, but it also felt powerful. She wiped the last trace of tears from her cheeks, touched up her makeup, and practiced a neutral expression until it felt natural. Anyone looking at her would see a bride ready for her big moment. As she stepped back into the corridor, music floated through the air, and voices buzzed with excitement. No one suspected a thing. She walked with measured steps, holding her head high, returning smiles automatically. Inside, she was counting moments, timing everything carefully. She knew exactly when she would act and how. The groom glanced at her as she approached, flashing that same confident smile that once made her heart race. This time, it did nothing. She smiled back, softly, perfectly, masking the truth behind her eyes. He had no idea that the woman standing before him was no longer the one he thought he knew. The wedding would go on, but it would not end the way anyone expected. The venue filled with soft music and hushed excitement as guests took their seats, faces glowing with anticipation. Flowers lined the aisle, candles flickered gently, and whispers of admiration floated through the air. To everyone watching, this was a perfect beginning, a celebration of love carefully planned down to the smallest detail. No one sensed the fracture beneath the surface, the truth hiding behind practiced smiles. The groom stood at the altar, straight-backed and confident, greeting acquaintances with easy charm. He looked pleased, almost smug, as if the future had already bent in his favor. This wedding to him was a victory, status secured, image polished, applause guaranteed. He adjusted his cufflinks and glanced toward the entrance, fully expecting the devoted bride he believed he had fooled. When the music shifted and she appeared at the end of the aisle, the room collectively held its breath. She walked slowly, gracefully, every step deliberate. Her face was calm, almost serene, revealing nothing of the storm she had survived just moments earlier. Those closest to her noticed something different but couldn't name it. An unfamiliar strength in her posture, a quiet authority in her gaze. As she moved forward, eyes followed her with admiration, cameras flashed, and hearts swelled. Inside, she was counting beats, measuring time, grounding herself in control. Each step brought her closer not just to the altar, but to the moment she had chosen with precision. Fear no longer guided her. Purpose did. The groom's smile widened as she approached, misreading her composure as devotion. He reached out when she arrived beside him, and she placed her hand in his without hesitation. To the audience, it looked like unity. To her, it was strategy. The air grew thick with anticipation, though no one could explain why. Something was coming, something unspoken, But for now, the ceremony moved forward exactly as planned. The officiant cleared his throat and began the familiar words, his voice steady and ceremonial. Vows, promises, forever. Each phrase floated through the hall like a script everyone had heard before. Then, just as the moment arrived when the groom was about to speak, she gently withdrew her hand from his. The small movement went unnoticed by most, but it shifted the energy in the room. She stepped slightly forward and reached for the microphone resting near the altar. The officiant paused, confused, but she gave a calm smile that silently asked for patience. Her voice, when she spoke, was even and clear, carrying effortlessly across the room. There was no tremble, no anger, only control. I need everyone to hear something before this continues. A murmur rippled through the guests. The groom turned toward her, his confident expression flickering for the first time. He leaned in, whispering urgently, but she ignored him. With one smooth motion, she gestured toward the large screen behind them, originally prepared for wedding photos. Instead, an audio recording began to play. His voice filled the hall, laughing, mocking, confessing, words about using her love, marrying for advantage, admitting he never cared. Each sentence landed like a strike. Gasps erupted from the audience. Hands flew to mouths. Parents stiffened in their seats. Friends exchanged stunned glances, unsure whether to look at the screen or the man standing exposed at the altar. The groom's face drained of color. He reached for the microphone, but she calmly stepped back, out of his reach. He shook his head, stammering excuses that sounded hollow against the undeniable proof echoing through the room. His charm collapsed under the weight of his own words. When the recording ended, silence followed, heavy, absolute. She spoke once more, still composed. She didn't insult him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stated the truth and thanked everyone for witnessing it. Then she turned, lifted her dress slightly, and walked away from the altar alone. Behind her, chaos finally erupted, but her revenge had already landed, precise and unforgettable. The moment she walked away, the groom was left standing alone under the bright lights, every eye in the hall fixed on him. The confident posture he had carried all day crumbled. He laughed nervously at first, a sharp, misplaced sound, as if humor could undo what everyone had just heard. He tried to speak, stumbling over words, claiming it was a joke, taken out of context, misunderstood. But no one was listening anymore. Whispers turned into open murmurs. Faces that once smiled at him hardened with disappointment and disgust. His mother rose slowly from her seat, shock written across her face, while his father looked away, unable to meet his son's eyes. Friends who had encouraged his arrogance stepped back, distancing themselves as if his disgrace were contagious. He reached toward the aisle, as if he might chase after the bride, but few relatives stopped him, their expressions stern. The authority he believed he had, over her, over the situation, was gone. In its place stood a man exposed, powerless, stripped of respect in a single moment. Guests began leaving their seats, some shaking their heads, others openly criticizing him. Phones buzzed. The story was already spreading beyond the hall. The groom's shoulders slumped as he realized there was no escape, no explanation that could repair the damage. In front of everyone he once sought to impress, his carefully crafted image collapsed, leaving only the truth behind. She turned back one last time, her face calm, her voice steady as she addressed the room. There was no anger in her tone, no tears left to offer him. She thanked the guests for coming, apologized softly for the interruption, and then made it clear that the wedding was over. Not postponed, not delayed, but canceled by her choice. She explained she deserved honesty, respect, and love, and she would accept nothing less. Not today, not ever. She did not look at the groom when she spoke. He no longer deserved her attention. Instead, she spoke for herself, reclaiming her dignity in front of everyone who mattered. Each word landed like a final seal, closing a chapter he thought he controlled. With a slow breath, she removed the ring from her finger and placed it gently on the altar. The simple gesture carried more weight than any shout ever could. Gasps rippled through the hall as she turned away. She walked down the aisle alone, head held high, steps steady, shoulders straight. The dress that once symbolized commitment now represented freedom. Behind her, the groom stood frozen, surrounded by silence and judgment. She did not look back. Her exit was quiet, powerful, and unforgettable, leaving him humiliated not by cruelty, but by her strength. In that moment, she proved that revenge did not need screams or chaos, only truth, timing, and the courage to choose herself over a beautiful lie and walk into a future she finally owned completely. The hall was heavy with silence long after she had walked away. Guests murmured in hushed tones, exchanging glances that spoke of shock, disbelief, and admiration. Some whispered about the courage it took to confront betrayal so calmly, while others replayed the moments in their minds, realizing they had witnessed more than a wedding. They had witnessed a masterclass in dignity and self-respect. The bride, though no longer in the room, became the center of every conversation. Stories of her composure, her clever handling of the situation, and her refusal to succumb to anger or panic spread quickly. In the eyes of family, friends, and even strangers, she was no longer just a bride who had been wronged. She was a symbol of strength, intelligence, and unshakable self-worth. Meanwhile, the groom faced immediate social consequences. Former friends avoided him, family members expressed disappointment, and whispers of his betrayal circulated endlessly. His arrogance, once admired, was replaced with shame and isolation. For the first time, he realized the cost of his actions, not just the humiliation, but the loss of respect and trust that could never be regained. The balance of power had shifted permanently, and the room's atmosphere lingered with the quiet lesson that true strength and integrity always command respect. She left the wedding behind, but not the lessons it had taught her. The months that followed were filled with reflection, quiet decisions, and careful steps toward a new life. She focused on herself, rebuilding her confidence and reclaiming every piece of herself that had been lost in trust and love she had freely given. Each day, she became stronger, wiser, and more certain of what she deserved. Her friends and family noticed the change immediately. There was a glow in her presence, a calm authority in her words, a self-assuredness that drew admiration rather than pity. She no longer sought validation from anyone, nor did she allow anyone to diminish her worth. The pain of betrayal remained, but it no longer held power over her. Instead, it became a teacher, guiding her toward better choices, clearer boundaries, and a life built on respect and honesty. She embraced love cautiously now, knowing that admiration without respect was meaningless. She learned that true partnership required equality, trust, and integrity, and that compromise should never come at the cost of self-respect. She also realized that endings, even painful ones, can be beginnings when met with courage and clarity. In the quiet moments of her new life, she smiled at the freedom she had won, the dignity she had preserved, and the lessons she carried forward. No regrets lingered, only growth. The wedding that had once threatened to define her now stood as a symbol of triumph over deception, proof that a woman who knows her worth can face betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, and still emerge victorious. Empowered, unbroken, and unshakably herself, she walked forward into a future entirely her own, leaving behind only the echoes of lessons learned and the quiet satisfaction of justice served.